Welcome, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Bringing Employees Back. Today's webinar is brought to you by Premier Academy 360. Attend webinars like this one or visit our content library and on-demand learning at learnacademy360.com. Q&A will be provided at the end of this presentation. Please chat in your questions anytime during the webinar. We want to hear from you and continue to provide the content you want. Please stick around after this presentation is over and answer our survey poll. This is week number 6 and the last of our planned Premier Academy's human resource related COVID support series. This week is special as we have collaborated with SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management, which is an international HR association that is the foremost expert and thought leader on issues impacting today's evolving workplaces. With 300,000 plus HR and business executive members in 165 countries, SHRM impacts the lives of more than 115 million workers and families globally. With SHRM's up-to-date COVID-related research and VSP's knowledge of your business, we hope that our topic for today, Bringing Employees Back, will be relevant for your needs in the near future. In the next week or two, VSP will be sending out a survey to many practices regarding your current COVID-19 needs. In addition, we are gearing up to support your practices even more in the leadership, staffing, and HR-related space. So in the same survey, we will be asking your top team-related priorities and where you need the most help, not just during COVID-19, but moving forward. If you have not yet had the time to review the previous webinar sessions, we encourage you to check them out at learnacademy360.com to find a recorded webinar, including supporting tools for the following topics. You'll find they complement the work we're doing today with SHRM. Leading in a time of crisis, learn techniques for planning and positively impacting others and your practice. In tough times, be your best self in times of crisis on and off the job. It starts with trust. Learn how to develop, restore, or extend trust in our relationships, which helps create efficiencies, increases credibility, and increase the bottom line. And stop the gossip, where you will learn practical skills to keeping office gossip and the rumor mill down. Before we officially begin, just a quick reminder. We are not professional, financial, medical, or legal advisors, so please consult with your professional association guidelines, state labor resources, financial advisors, attorneys, etc. for advice. We all know how COVID-19 has not only rocked our world financially, it has big impacts on the way we work. For example, a lot of other workplaces are having telecommuting as an option, as we learned through SHRM's research. SHRM has identified more than 60% of workers are engaging in telework, making this the highest national total in nearly 35 years. Unfortunately, due to the nature of all of your work, optometry doesn't really fit the telework profile. As such, less than a third of small businesses like optometry can operate remotely. That's why we're here today, to help you plan for what to expect in bringing your team back. I am happy to introduce Amber Clayton, one of our partners at SHRM. Amber oversees SHRM's Knowledge Center, including Ask an Advisor service. Amber is highly qualified with several certifications and earned her bachelor's in business administration from the University of Baltimore. She has been in various HR roles for over 20 years and understands the needs of providers and consumers, as she has worked in healthcare in retail industry prior to joining SHRM in 2011. Welcome, Amber. Please take it away.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm honored to be a guest speaker on behalf of SHRM and for Premier today. As I go through the presentation, please send your questions through that WebEx chat that Lauren mentioned at the end. I'll make sure that we try to get as many questions answered as we can. Also, just keep in mind that in a few days, we'll be sending this recorded presentation and handouts and tools with more detail to support your needs. We actually have a return to work checklist that we're going to be providing to you. Keep in mind that with SHRM, we're a professional membership organization and we work with many different employers in different industries. So the checklist that we provided is actually going to be very general. It's not going to be specific to your industry. However, you're going to find a lot of really helpful information in there that you could use as we move along. So my hope today, and our hope today, is that you'll consider specific issues you may face in returning your staff back to the practice, anticipate and plan for both the practical and logistics as well as the team behaviors and expectations. And you'll be given information to help you and your employees have a smooth return to work. So what are some of the more common challenges faced by medical practices and other employers? Right now, the top challenges thus far through our SHRM research is about uncertainty in resuming the operations and the future needs of businesses. Many employers have actually contacted us looking for guidance on what they need to consider when reopening and returning employees to work. Many just don't know. They have to keep in mind that there may be state laws that may require them to stay closed, and some may be requiring them to open back up, or essential workers may be coming back to work. So that has actually been a top challenge for our employers. And the other thing is maintaining employee morale now and when they return. We found that through our SHRM research that more than half the employers are actually concerned about this, and they should be, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Employers are also concerned about the impact of the new regulations and guidance on the business. And if you have already had these same concerns, you're clearly not alone. We've been the busiest that we've ever been in the Knowledge Center at SHRM with this COVID, and we've been trying to help our members with everything that's been happening so far this year. So as we look at our practices and how to survive what comes next, there are several key considerations. First, if you haven't already, it's a best practice to make a plan and consider what you might encounter as you reopen, and as leaders, what you and your employees will likely face. You'll want to ensure that the workplace is safe not only for your employees, but also for your patients and your vendors. And that goes with that safety being first. It is imperative to make sure that you follow the guidelines of your state and include a return to work plan. And third, adding an infectious disease prevention policy into your standard operating procedures will actually benefit your practices moving forward, and VSP will be working on a sample policy for you. Finally, it's going to be a whole new world upon return. It's important not only to look at the measures you've already put into place, but to think about how your return to work may need to drastically change and potentially be institutionalized moving forward. So this means being open to new ideas and thinking differently and executing appropriately to meet the needs of your teams, your patients, and the business. And again, these are key factors. They're just a few that can be found in the return to work checklist that I mentioned that's going to be available to you after the end of the webcast. So when you return, we might see a few warning signs when the team returns, and having a plan in place to provide support will actually pay off for you. So when you begin to reopen, expect that you may actually have turnover, especially for those of you who have actually laid off employees. Typically when employees are laid off, they're still looking for other opportunities to make money, and especially for those who have spouses who have lost work as well. So those individuals may actually not come back to work if they've been laid off. Expect that you may have low attendance and morale. We know that team members, they're going to have concerns about their own safety. They're going to have concerns about their safety of the family members, especially if their family members have underlying medical conditions. And they're going to have concerns about coming back and being exposed to other employees. They don't know whether or not those employees have been exposed to COVID or have had COVID, so they may be concerned about that as well. So the team will need to adjust to the new normal. It'll likely include a lot of new processes and procedures, and we're going to talk about those today, such as reassigned duties. So when, for example, if you're only returning part of your team, you'll need to actually figure out how and who's going to be handling those responsibilities of the people that are no longer employed. So keep in mind that employees are already experiencing stress. I know even for myself, I'm experiencing stress working from home full-time now. But if you're coming back to work and you're making employees work two jobs, for example, they're now taking on somebody else's role, that's just going to add more stress to those individuals. So you really have to think about those things. And think about the fact that some of those employees may actually reject those reassigned duties. And so how are you going to respond to that rejection? Before assigning the task, meet with the returning employees, get their feedback. You're going to have more buy-in from them if you do. You can do this via telephone, via video conferencing right now. unless your offices are still currently open. The other thing is including the employees in the decision making. You'll be able to get more ideas from them. I always think that more heads are better than one. So with this pandemic, we're all aware about the concern of returning to work, specifically around the safety. So with regards to the safety, as you can see great, next slide. Based on their SHRM research, we have several things that are top concerns, and the biggest one, of course, is the safety. And some of you may already be familiar with OSHA, the Occupational Health and Safety Administration. Under OSHA, employers have an obligation to maintain a safe, free from hazard workplace so that employees are not experiencing any kind of serious harm or injury, and that does include illnesses as well. This is called the General Duty Clause. And it's key to continue your current safety practices that you have, but you may actually need to do more because of the pandemic, so especially if you have more than one office. So it's important to look at all your locations and see how you can make your practices safer. One of the most challenging parts of this pandemic is that we just don't know what's going to happen. Things are changing daily, sometimes even hourly. Guidance from the CDC it has been the same as far as masks and gloves and cleaning, and that will probably continue, but there may be more as we go along, and it's really important to make sure that your practices are staying up to date on the latest information from the CDC as well as your state and local governments. Premier Academy and any professional associations, they're all going to be really great resources for you to help navigate through this whole return to work process. So with regards to cleaning, think about how you clean currently and whether or not you need to do more of it. So having cleaning services maybe coming in more frequently, but also maybe there's areas within your practices where you don't typically have it cleaned frequently. For example, maybe the arms on the chairs or the doorknobs that are outside or inside in your offices. Those are things, anything that gets touched pretty frequently, you want to make sure that you clean those surfaces regularly. So even though they might not be part of your regular cleaning service, you might want to add that and you might want to do it more frequently. There's also modifications to the work site that you might need to consider. So obviously you know that we are working under the 6 feet distance, keeping that social distancing part. So think about your offices right now and how closely the employees, the vendors, the patients work together currently, and whether or not you're going to be able to provide that 6 feet distance or any kind of physical barriers. For example, placing like a plexiglass barrier between the reception and the patients. I know I was in the airport last night and the security booth actually had a plexiglass shield up between myself and the security officers. That's something that I'm regularly seeing now in different businesses. So think about that and how your offices are laid out and whether or not that's something you can actually do. The other thing might be if you have the ability to install touchless items, if you have things in your bathroom like a touchless soap dispenser, a faucet, hand dryers, those are all things to try to limit touching surfaces and minimizing the risk of actually increasing getting exposed to the disease. The other thing that some employers may be doing are things like installing a buzzer on their door or setting their appointments so they're not actually letting everyone in at the same time. So they're keeping, maybe a certain number of people in at a given time to make sure that people are able to social distance within their work site. So those are all things to keep in mind. The other thing is, making an appointment or calling when they arrive so that your employees can actually open the door to bring the patients in or the vendors in. So again, it's not just open to the public. Another thing to think about is equipment. So your team's going to want to know that you have the proper PPE, the personal protective equipment, and many of you probably already use much of this, including the face mask or gloves. But think about, the CDC guidance encouraging the mask, the face shields, the goggles, the gloves. Is there anything else that your employees can do to be safe within the office? The other thing is employee policies and practices. So employees might be coming back and they might be confident that you all are doing everything that you could possibly do to maintain a safe environment. But again, as I mentioned, they might be concerned about exposure to others. So a best practice is to create or update your policies to make sure that when employees are sick, they're staying home. And as an employer, you can tell someone that they have to stay home if they're sick. So, but have a policy that says if you're feeling sick, if you have a fever that's lasted more than 24 hours, make sure that they're staying home so they're not coming home and exposing everyone else in the workplace. If you're currently taking temperatures of employees, that's fine. Many employers are doing that right now, and some are requiring their employees to take their temperatures at home before they come to work, and letting the employer know that they don't have a fever before coming in, and some are taking it upon themselves to actually take the temperatures before they actually enter the work site. So those are things that you may want to address if they're not already addressed in your policies and practices. And then also think about, we're here about the post-COVID testing. We don't know yet how much is going to be available, who will be able to be tested, but we're hearing now that employers are looking at the possibility of post-COVID testing or anti-COVID testing for their employees. And right now, employers can perform medical tests just because we're in a pandemic. But we don't know yet if that's going to be something that's going to be mandated by federal or state or local government. So again, continue to keep abreast of what's happening with the CDC and with your associations in Premier to find out what's happening in that area. So just going back to social distancing for a moment, think about what you're seeing right now if you're out in public, like at grocery stores. You see that there are signs on the floor. Some of them have one-way signs. Some of them have caution tape blocking off areas. Think about those things and how they may work within your offices. Is there a spot where you can have desks or tables or desks that are available within your offices? I know my vision provider has that, where there are about 3 or 4 desks that are set up, making sure that those are at least 6 feet apart, and maybe possibly putting up that plexiglass so that there's a barrier between the patients and your employees. So those are things to think about. And also varying the staff schedules. That may help with social distancing too. So if you're a Monday through Friday office, think about maybe you're, having someone who comes in later, just so that you're not having all your employees working at one time. You may be able to stagger the schedules. So that's one of the other big decisions that you're facing when returning employees to work is the scheduling. And this is where you're going to get a lot of questions from the employees. So I mentioned telecommuting. I know that many of you are not able to allow for telecommuting, and that's something that many employers are actually doing right now. But you should think about these types of things, and if there are, in fact, any roles within your offices that can be done from home. And you should also think about, what's going to happen with the employees when you reopen. Some of them may be able to return, but some of them not at all. A lot of times, we've had different challenges. Our lives have changed. Employees are now tasked with balancing work and caring for children. They have elderly relatives. Public transportation may not be readily available. So if you're in an area where you have employees who are traveling to work and taking buses or trains, you'll have to consider that those may not be active, or they may have limited schedules, which would then affect the employee's schedule. There's also shelter-in-place laws in many states that actually prevent employees from crossing state lines to go to work unless it's essential, so keeping that in mind. And also, some employees may say that they're going to be, they're vulnerable to contracting diseases if they have an underlying health condition, a compromised immune system, or their family members do. So they may be concerned about returning to work. And so if you can work with them and consider things like possibly a leave of absence, that may be something to consider, allowing employees if they're having issues coming back to work, or allowing that telecommuting if you can. Staggering those schedules, maybe rotating the schedules where half the employees come in the morning, half of them come in the evening. or possibly even with lunches or breaks. I know some offices take lunch at the same time, so they'll close down, they'll take lunch, and everybody will eat lunch in a break room or they'll eat together. You may want to stagger those to make sure that people are social distancing. I think the biggest thing in this to take away is that, be supportive, try to work with your employees, and, to do so, you're going to need to talk to them. So besides the safety and the schedules, getting aligned on what will be the new expectations and the new world when your team comes back to the practice is going to be something that you'll have to look into. So here's some expectations. As you reopen, think about the following: the organizational structure. What you want to do is think about the roles that are in your practice and how they may have changed, whether it's the task or the jobs that have been added or reprioritized. If you've thought about in the past that you wanted to restructure your organization, maybe change your positions, eliminate some, add some, now is really a good time to do that because you're in a position where many of you are closed right now and you're going to be recalling employees back to work. So now's a chance to kind of look at that and say, okay, do I really have all the positions that I need within my organization, or do I have too many? Is there positions that can actually be combined? So think about that. Think about your current team. Do they have the skills needed to adapt to this new world? And if not, what's the plan for closing that gap? And if they can take it on, how do you plan to communicate those expectations to them when they're returning back to work? The other thing you want to think about is your work culture. And this is how we operate, how we communicate, how we treat each other. It's also your brand. So think about, what's going to bring your customers back. For example, if you are known to be a friendly and service-oriented practice, what are the behavior expectations for the team moving forward? Are they the same or are they different? And how do you normally communicate that with your team? And with your customers, with your patients? Do you normally communicate it via email with them? Do you reach out directly and contact them by phone? Think about those things because you're going to have to look at that when you start to reopen to let your customers, your vendors, and your employees know that you're going to reopen, when you're going to reopen, and what the new process is going to be, if there's going to be one person at a time, if there's going to be limited appointments, things of that nature. So just keep that in mind when thinking about your work culture and how that might change. The other thing is performance goals. So will your operations and leadership and team and individual goals need to change? Are there specific goals that are key to aligning your team to the expectations moving forward? So, for example, if your optician sales goals previously were 90%, do they change now since the patient flow may be slower in this return to work period? Think about those things. If you have formal processes or procedures in place with regard to performance, if you have individual employee goals, are they the same with how you're going to come back to work and how you're going to change things? Do you need to modify those for your employees? The other thing, again, is your policies and procedures. So you may need to take a look at those and see what needs to be updated based on the impacts of COVID. For example, adding an infectious disease policy. If you don't already have one, you may want to have one. And if there's going to be long-term changes that will be made, do you have a business continuity plan, or do you have a practice response plan for these types of situations or for other emergencies like natural disasters? Things like these tools are really helpful for future scenarios and can act like a playbook for you and your practice so that you feel that you're better prepared and your employees are prepared for that. The other thing is team meetings. So team meetings, they're very important now more than ever to ensure that your team is on the same page and they're feeling like they have open opportunity to hear what leadership says and to be able to ask questions. And so if you currently have team meetings, what do they look like now? And what will they look like when you return? Will you be able to do the social distancing requirements? If everybody's back in the office and you have a small office, is there space for you to space out to be able to do 6 feet of social distancing? Are these meetings that could be done via video conference, via telephone? So think about those regular team meetings. If they happen on a weekly basis, are you going to have them more frequently, less frequently? More frequently is probably better. because you do want to keep continuing to meet with and talk to your employees about things that are happening and things that are changing. And, if you didn't have team meetings at all, this is a missed opportunity to connect with your team and to calm any fears and gaps and in understanding. So, given that need, again, kind of look at your spaces, see what you can do to make sure that your team meetings are safe and that you're still going to be able to have them, and make sure that they are still going to be effective, and make sure that you can have those one-on-one meetings just as much as you can have those team meetings, because this really gives you the opportunity to stop things like the rumor mill, which we know is going to be an issue when people start to come back to work. And so how do you control that is really important, especially in these tough times. So last week, there was a session with Premier Academy 360 called Stop the Gossip. And if you had attended that, you learned that the cost of gossip is a liability for practices. It's not only a loss of trust and increased fear, but it's also negatively impacts the time and it wastes resources and your financials. I think we've all kind of probably worked in an environment where we've had a lot of rumors and a lot of gossip and word spreads like wildfire. I don't know that I've ever worked in a business that hasn't had that. But, there are things that you can do to help stop the rumor mill. And some of those is, to, again, be honest, be transparent with employees to help manage that rumor mill. Keeping cautiously optimistic is helpful, yet you don't want to sugarcoat things. It's important to be aware and to address the concerns while at the same time balancing the realities. It's also key to answer a question if you know the answer, and if you don't know the answer, to just share that you don't know and that you'll look into it. So, for example, if part of your team is not going to be recalled, for those that are being recalled, just provide general information to them. Let them know why you've made the decision that you've made. You don't have to give specifics as to why certain people weren't selected to return, but I think it's important to share and be clear what the business reason was. And you could say, for example, the patient volume has decreased, and due to the social distancing requirement, there's only a need for so many roles to come back, for the next month or maybe at all, and that you'll be monitoring closely the patient's needs and the state guidelines to ensure safety. And, it is advised to state in the recall message that not everyone will be recalled if that's the case for your particular practice. Some practices are going to be able to return everyone or want to return everyone, but that might not happen across the board. So, if you can communicate that in advance and let people know, and also let them know that you'd like to talk to each individual directly so that you could avoid that situation where you call up Jane and Jane starts calling up every other person in the office to say, hey, I got this call, I'm being recalled, how about you? So, let people know what's happening. Let them know that you'd like that opportunity to speak one-on-one with the employees so that you could tell them directly what's going on, and that will help to stop that rumor mill. And again, just be available. Speak with the employees, answer their questions. You could do that one-on-one, and you could also do that in the team as well. So we're getting close to the end of the official presentation, and if you haven't already submitted questions, please get ready to do so. But one last area I just want to cover is survivor's guilt. And some of the things you'll hear, again, when people start to get recalled, there will be individuals that will feel guilty because they were recalled and other employees were not. So that is part of survivor's guilt, is when you're returning the work to teammates that are coming back, and you may actually feel some of that as well. That you feel guilt because you weren't able to bring back everyone either. So you'll have to deal with that, and you'll have to communicate with those employees. And again, just be timely, be transparent. It's really going to be imperative to be open and honest with these employees during this time and have that two-way dialogue with them. And, as I mentioned, everyone's going through a challenging time right now. Some employees, they've been furloughed, some have been laid off, their spouses have been laid off, they may be struggling financially. Some employees have had to become teachers. I know I have with my 16-year-old daughter, and I've still had to work full-time too. Some have, younger children. It's been very difficult. So we've all gone through, several different things during this period. And there's a lot of growing frustration and people are protesting to try to reopen the businesses. So, just keep all those things in mind. For all those of you who actually do plan to bring everybody back, I think that's great. For those of you who do have to select employees, I know that's never an easy process. And I've been working in HR for years, and it's never easy to tell someone that they're being let go, especially in a situation where it's not their fault. It's more of a business decision that needs to be made. So when you're recalling those employees, just keep in mind, base it on job-related reasons, like the role or the skills that are needed, the job performance, the seniority. What you don't want is to let someone go and they would think, oh, well, why was I let go over somebody else? Is it because of my religion? Is it because I took leave of absence, or they're retaliating against me because I had a workers' comp claim? So it's really important to make sure that you understand and communicate what the recall procedures look like and what the selection process was, so that you don't have employees who are feeling like they were unfairly selected to not be recalled to work. And in one of your previous Premier Academy 360 sessions, you heard about talking straight, and this is definitely the time to talk straight. It may be uncomfortable, but it's going to lead to stronger relationships. It's going to lead to a healthier workplace, a more engaged team, and happy patients. When you're recalling employees to work and you're letting some of them go, something to think about. And again, this is based on you and what you can do. But some employers provide severance packages, and those severance packages typically look like a 1 to 2 weeks of pay for every week or every year of work. And normally employers aren't required to provide severance pay, but it's really good for employees, especially employee morale for those who are staying, because you could say, we're giving a generous severance package to these individuals who are no longer returning, and it's good for them, the former employees now, and it's good for the people who are still there. So if you can do that, great. The other thing you could do too is help with the outplacement services. If you work with your local unemployment offices, they may be able to provide you some guidance and resources to give to those employees who are not being recalled to work. So anything that you could do to help those individuals is really going to be beneficial for you and beneficial for the employees who are there in the morale. And again, just going back to what I mentioned, a lot of these individuals are experiencing challenges. We hear about mental resources for stress, anxiety, depression right now because of the things that are happening, whether it's a furlough, a layoff, their hours or pay have been reduced. We're hearing that a lot from employers. Again, having to juggle that daycare, children, working full time. And some of them have been sick. Their family members been sick. Some of them have even passed away. And life events, just getting married, going to funerals, birthdays, anniversaries, they're all being done virtually now, and you're not even able to have parties with your family members. So it's been a lot on a lot of people. And so if you don't have any mental health resources available to your employees, I would just encourage you to talk to your healthcare provider. If your healthcare provider doesn't have information, if you have an employee assistance program, an EAP, they may be able to provide you some information, some literature to give to your employees. Some of the EAPs actually provide 6 free sessions with counselors. So I would definitely provide that information to your employees. And if you don't have an EAP and you don't have a healthcare provider, you could certainly check with external organizations. There are some external ones, maybe your local health department, and there are resources online that you can obtain just to provide that information to the employees, just in case they're feeling those emotions and feelings that I mentioned previously. So as we close, here are some things to remember. Communication is the number one thing. I've talked about that multiple times throughout the presentation. Planning and forethought will ensure your success. So really think about what you need to do, and that return to work help check, the return to work checklist that I mentioned is really going to help you and your thought process and your decision-making process. So when you get that, take a look at it. Again, not all of it's going to be for you, but there's a lot of really good information in there that should help you determine your course of action moving forward. So that is it for me for now. I see there are some questions that are coming in. Lauren?
Thank you, Amber. Quickly, I want to apologize for the technical difficulties that some of you experienced today. It looks like our audio broadcast crashed, and audio is only available through the call-in feature. So hopefully everyone was able to get connected okay through the call-in number. We will be sending out an email with the recording of today's webinar within the next few days. So if you miss anything because of the audio issues, you will be able to review that this week. Okay, so now we will begin our Q&A segment. And as a reminder, you can chat in your questions using the chat feature. And we do have a couple questions that have come through. So our first question for you is, can we require our people to be tested for COVID-19 before returning?
Yes. So as I mentioned previously, right now the regulations have loosened up a bit when it comes to a pandemic, and employers actually can have their employees COVID tested before coming back to work. But keep in mind, too, that there are still locations where COVID testing might not be readily available. So, there may be delays in getting people back to work if that's going to be expected of them. So I just wanted to make sure that you realize that some people may not be able to get that quickly.
Okay. So next question, should recalled employees have to complete new hire paperwork again? And do they need to refill out the I-9?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've actually gotten this question a couple of times. So it depends on whether or not you have furloughed your employees, which basically means you put them on a temporary leave of absence and they're still active on your payroll. Or if you lay them off, which is actually a separation from them on the payroll. And if it is a furlough, they're still actively employed. Usually you don't want to fill out the new hire paperwork again, and they don't need to fill out the new hire paperwork again. But if they are separated, it is recommended to have them fill out the new hire paperwork again, especially if they've been laid off for a little while, because things have changed. And so you may want to have them fill out that paperwork over again. But it is entirely up to you and your practices at your organization. There's no federal or state law that says you have to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. And this one is from a small office. And they say, during this close down, I have continued normal payroll, even though workload is remarkably less. Unemployment, I am understanding, is giving $600 per week extra beyond unemployment benefits. How do we handle this? I was able to obtain PPP.
Okay. And I'm sorry, Lauren, did you mention that they're still doing weekly payroll?
Yes, they have continued payroll.
Okay. So this is interesting. So typically, yes, employees were eligible for unemployment if they had their hours reduced, their salary reduced, or they were furloughed on unpaid, or they were laid off. And so once employees start coming back to work and getting their regular salary, the employer is really supposed to contact the state's unemployment agency to let them know that those employees have returned, because they'll no longer be eligible for unemployment benefits. So that's something that the employer will want to make sure that they do call, even if they're not coming back with their regular full-time hours. Let's say they're bringing their employees back part-time. They still should reach out to the state's unemployment office to ensure that they know that they've recalled employees, so that they can make sure that benefits are not continuing to be paid. Because sometimes if they're overpaid, those employees are going to have to pay it back to the state.
Okay. So on that note, can employees refuse a recall to work? And if so, can they still collect unemployment? Any tips on that?
Yeah, so, I mean, absolutely. Anyone can refuse to come back to work. Typically that's the right of the employee, and it's also the right of the employer to say, sorry, there's no longer a job if you don't come back to work. So, my thinking is most employees are going to want to come back, but I have heard that there are employees who are requesting to not come back because they're getting paid unemployment, and their unemployment happens to be better than their normal pay. Unfortunately, again, if the employer is offering a recall and they're coming back to work, or they are supposed to be coming back to work, and they don't accept it, you would want to go ahead and tell the state's unemployment office, because if they've been offered work and they've declined, then they could lose that unemployment benefit.
Okay. And then another question is, if we decide to not recall a specific employee, how long do we have to wait until we can fill their position?
Yeah, that's a good one. We definitely get that question a lot too. So there is no specific guidance on how long you have to wait, but just keep in mind that if you let someone go, you don't recall them back to work, and then you post for their position again a couple of weeks later, you're going to probably have that same employee applying for the job or calling you back and asking you, why did you post that position again? You just let me go. So, so just kind of keep that in mind, because you don't want to make it appear as though you let them go for unlawful reasons, but if somebody is not being recalled to work, say for job performance reasons, because they just weren't, performing to the company's standards, then, let the employees know that, so that they understand they wouldn't reapply for the position. Again, that goes back to being transparent and honest. I know sometimes it's, those are difficult things, but if you are, you could repost that position again and hire the next week if you want to. That's completely up to you.
Okay, and we have time for one more question. So our last question today is going to be, do health benefits start over again when an employee is returned to work? Yeah,
that's a good one. So again, it depends on whether or not the person is furloughed or laid off. So if they're furloughed, they're still active, their health insurance probably continued. If they were laid off and it's a separation, it's really a matter of the employer's benefit plan documents. You'd have to look at that benefit plan summary in your documents to see whether or not there's language in there that allowed the employee to continue the health insurance. If not, the employee could actually be reinstated, because under the Affordable Care Act, when an employee gets rehired, if they're rehired within a certain period of time, they could just go right back on the insurance and they don't have to wait any longer. So look at your plan documents and just see whether or not that insurance continued during that period of time that they were out, whether it was an unpaid leave, furlough, or if it was laid off, and then that will help you determine whether or not the health insurance can continue immediately when they come back.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, this concludes our time for questions. Thank you for joining us today, Amber. We really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you. I hope that this was helpful.
Yeah, I think it was. And you should see a survey window on your screen momentarily. Please take a moment to provide your feedback. We will be sending out an email, again, with the recording of this webinar within the next 24 hours or so. Recordings can also be found at learnacademy360.com. And be sure to check out learnacademy360.com to register for upcoming webinars. We have 3 continuing education webinars coming up. They are called Building Blocks to a Great Optometric Diabetes Practice with Dr. Jeff Gerson and Dr. Paul Chouse. And this is a 3-part series. Part 1 is on May 19th, Part 2 is May 20th, and Part 3 is May 21st. And they're worth a total of 5 hours of CE credit. So if you haven't seen those yet, make sure to check those out. Again, you can register on learnacademy360.com. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And again, make sure to provide your feedback in that survey window. And thank you so much for your time today, and apologize for the technical issues.